Like Vice TV's Dark Side of the Ring, this story features jealousy, mistrust, and betrayal. But it ends very differently. In the early 1980s, pro wrestling was still a territorial game. Hulk Hogan was the most popular star in the Midwest, while Roddy Piper was known and had extreme heat, but they were on a path to collide at WWF's War to Settle the Score event in February 1985. The main event, which aired on MTV, featured Hogan defending his WWF World Heavyweight Championship. The tension between him and the challenger Piper was palpable throughout the match. That is, until Roddy's buddies Paul Orndorff and Bob Orton Jr. interfered, causing his disqualification and an ultimate win for Hulk Hogan. But there was much more going down behind the scenes to fuel this feud than met the eyes of MTV's record number of viewers. Hogan and Piper's disdain for one another first began to fester in 1984 when Roddy attacked pop princess Cyndi Lauper and wrestling manager Lou Albano during an awards ceremony, following a storyline, of course. Hulk Hogan made the save as planned, taking the story in a new direction, one that terrified Roddy. He worried America would hate him for what he did to Cyndi Lauper. Girls just want to have fun, not get their ass kicked. As Piper and Hogan geared up for Settle the Score, it became clear that working together would be nearly impossible. WWF owner Vince McMahon says Hulk didn't trust Roddy, and that seemed to go both ways. Piper described Hulk's WWF deal as signing with the devil. Resentment between the future Hall of Famers continued to grow as they worked out the creative for that Settle the Score match. Piper was notoriously protective over the record of his wins and losses. Hogan described his foe's strategy at the time as a lot of take and not much give. But Roddy stuck to his guns. Even years later, when asked in an interview why he refused to be pinned by Hogan, Piper was all, "You're damn right, isn't that the idea?" He believed rarely being pinned would make it more meaningful when he was. Hulk was frustrated by that mentality and felt it made Roddy difficult to work with. "I'd hit Piper and it would be like hitting a brick wall. He didn't move," Hogan has said. So they didn't really get to settle the score as the event suggested when that match ended in that DQ. But Hogan and Piper's real-life friction was so apparent throughout the bout that fans wanted to see more. The timing couldn't have been better. Hogan and Piper might have been the last guy each one would have chosen to work with, but their destinies were about to crash into one another, just like their egos. Vince McMahon was booking the first ever WrestleMania, promising to make it the greatest wrestling event of all time. So he obviously needed the hottest rivalry in all of wrestling for his main event. Plus, in 1985, Hulk Hogan was Vince's guy. All the WWF eggs were going into the Hulkamania basket. Roddy could see McMahon protecting who he considered to be his top guy and was admittedly jealous.
Back then, they were paying Hogan more than myself. They would put Hogan in a limousine with cops around him and let me get stabbed. I've been stabbed 3 times.
Roddy also says it was clear Hulk was hot at him over his refusal to do the job at Settle the Score. They would get another chance just weeks later. The team of Hulk Hogan and 80s television legend Mr. T took on Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff at WrestleMania I, with Muhammad Ali as the match's special enforcer. This wasn't just a pay-per-view, it was a worldwide pop culture phenomenon sparked by the heat between Hulk and Roddy. Tension in the ring was palpable. Having Orndorff by his side meant Piper wouldn't have to take the pin for Hulkamania to run wild at WrestleMania. But he had more than Hogan to worry about. Roddy and Mr. T didn't get along very well either. The 8-team star felt Piper was disrespectful to him, and he was probably right, as Roddy has said repeatedly since then that he did not appreciate an actor coming in to play wrestling. "I was going to take him out in the match for good," Piper admitted, "but I didn't do it." Of course he didn't do it. Hogan has said he was adamant about protecting his Hollywood friend in the ring and was obviously intimidating enough to force Roddy to think twice. The match still had plenty of heat, though, until it ended predictably with Hogan pinning Piper's teammate, Paul Orndorff. While Hulk and Mr. T stood victorious at the end of WrestleMania I, Roddy knocked the ref out before storming backstage. Had the very real rivalry between these main eventers ruined their ability to work together ever again? Hulk weighed in saying this in an interview years later. "There was legitimate heat between me and Piper. He always wanted to come out on top no matter what it was. I think it was detrimental to us really moving forward. Where do you go from there?" Hogan and Piper had a few more tag matches in 1985 to follow up, but fans never got a resolution to their on-screen feud. They wouldn't face each other again in singles action for over a decade. After years of being the face of WWF, Hulk Hogan left the company when his contract expired in late 1993. By March of '94, he popped up on the less popular but growing WCW. Roddy would remain under the thumb of Vince McMahon. But then, the invasion angle that would change the business. By 1996, Hulk was tired of telling fans to take their vitamins. He ditched his signature yellow gear for an edgier look and joined forces with the Outsiders, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, who had also migrated to WCW from WWF. These three huge stars together became the New World Order, and Hulk upgraded himself to Hollywood Hogan. The NWO was coming off a storyline feud with Randy Savage that capitalized on Hogan's history with him. But after he beat Macho Man at Halloween Havoc in 1996, the NWO got a huge surprise. Cue the bagpipes. Roddy Piper, who had just left WWF the month before, was barreling down the WCW ramp. Hogan's longtime nemesis would deliver a 25-minute promo insisting that he was just as important to the big boom of pro wrestling as Hogan. So, was all the drama for the cameras? Or was the animosity between them still thriving after 10 long years? Here's what the legendary Arn Anderson, who was in WCW at the time, said just a couple weeks ago on his podcast. "The word is that Piper didn't like Hogan, that's for sure. Whether or not Hogan liked Piper or not, I don't know, but there was always the story that those guys really did not get along at all." Hulk spoke for himself in an interview years later, exclaiming, "I was all for it," when asked about Roddy signing with WCW. Really, nothing was causing as big a splash in pro wrestling as the NWO with Hollywood Hogan at the helm. He was excited to reunite with opponents he had drawn big with in the past, like Randy Savage and Roddy. Fans didn't just love the memories, they were dying to know whether these guys still had heat. They would get their answer at Starrcade '96, where Hollywood Hogan and Roddy Piper were set for singles action in what WCW was calling the match of the decade. Would the old foes work together this time, or would their creative differences again affect the outcome of this much-hyped match? That answer came before the big bout during a contract signing at the World War III pay-per-view. Fans in the arena were audibly shocked when Hogan forced Piper to show the scar from his hip replacement surgery a year before. It was gnarly, humiliating, and awesome. This memorable stunt was also the first sign that the legends were united behind the scenes. A month later, Starrcade '96 featured a stacked card of huge stars and championship matches. But everyone was waiting for Hollywood Hogan and Roddy Piper's ultimate rematch. Piper made his entrance and walked the ramp all alone. There was no one else to take the pin this time. Had Roddy decided tonight was finally the night, or was Hollywood Hogan willing to give Piper the win he couldn't get against Hulk Hogan? After interference from Ted DiBiase, the Giant, and a fan who jumped the guardrail, only Piper and Hogan were left in the ring. Suddenly, Hogan throws a right hook. Roddy ducks, avoiding the punch in the face, leaving Hogan stunned and disoriented. Roddy quickly locks in a standing sleeper hold, rendering the face of the world's all-time biggest wrestling faction, NWO, Hollywood Hogan, helpless. Fans looked on in complete shock as Hogan's flailing arms went limp and he fell to the canvas. "He got him down," Tony Schiavone shouts on commentary. The ref checks on Hogan. Once, twice, 3 times. He can't believe it, but he calls for the bell. Ding, ding, ding. "Here's your winner, Roddy Piper." The announcer didn't actually say that like they usually do, but the commentary team reiterated that Piper was victorious. Maybe hearing it announced to the entire arena would have been a bigger blow to his ego than Hollywood Hogan was willing to take. Seems like there was still some backstage politics at play there. But the two longtime rivals had certainly come together and entertained. When asked years later about that L, Hogan explained, "Fans don't want to see count out after disqualification. I think they expected more of the same." Not more of the same, but this rivalry still wasn't dead. Hogan would put his WCW World Championship up against Piper at Super Bowl VII and again years later in 1999. Unlike the past, Piper and Hogan seemed to be on the same page at WCW, but they still hadn't settled the score in Vince McMahon's ring. Until Judgment Day 2003. Roddy and Hulk, aka Mr. America, faced each other for the final time, putting their on- and off-screen feud to rest. In a beautiful display of mutual respect, Hulk Hogan leg dropped, then pinned Roddy Piper. In 2005, both superstars were inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, partly thanks to their legendary work together. On stage, the men hugged and praised each other. They would appear together several times over the years in a WrestleMania 30 promo referencing their storied history, and on Raw in 2014 to celebrate Hulk's birthday. They reportedly talked often, and even their daughters Brooke Hogan and Teal Piper are best friends. Pro wrestling suffered a huge loss in July 2015 when Roddy Piper passed away after suffering a cardiac arrest. For his friend Hulk Hogan, it was a huge blow. "I will forever miss him," he told TMZ, adding, "He was my best friend. He is a legend." They had spoken on the phone just 2 days before. From bitter rivals to best friends, a legendary feud on camera and behind the scenes that ultimately brought out the best in both performers. That's the bright side of the ring. I'm Christy. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and follow me at Christy Reports. Thanks for watching.